Hello, everyone. Have you ever thought of creating a virtual machine in an Azure environment? Has it ever occurred to you the processes that you need to put in place when you are building an Azure virtual machine? Uh, in the next couple of minutes, I'm going to show you how you can create a virtual machine from scratch a in the Azure portal. There are other ways through which you can create a virtual machine, right? In an enterprise environment, you can use infrastructure as code to deploy your services. Remember, the Azure Virtual Machine is a typical example of an infrastructure as a service. It's an IaaS. And one of the ways we can create one is using the Azure portal. So if you have never built a VM before, just search globally, search for virtual machines. Yeah, there it is. And right now I have a Terraform VM. So this is a server I'm using for my Terraform workloads. I'm using for my Terraform testings before we go into production. So let's create a new one. So you're gonna go right here, the top left-hand corner, click on create. So you have several options to select from. You can actually go ahead and create a virtual machine. You can create a virtual machine with preset configurations. So if you already have a plan on how you want your virtual machine to be deployed, you can go ahead with that option. And there are other solutions you can consider. So let's go for the first option, create an Azure virtual machine. All right. So whenever I want to create a resource in Azure, you must have a subscription. So a subscription is how Azure will bill you, right? There are several subscription types. I won't go into that today. So check some of my videos where I've talked about how to procure subscriptions. So just consider subscription as your ticket to acquiring Azure resources. All right, so I already have a pay-as-you-go subscription, and I'm going to create a resource group because that has to be in a logical grouping. All right, let's give it a name. Let's give it a Blex Tech Resource Group. So what name are we going to give our virtual machine? Let's give it Blex VM, since this belongs to Blex Tech Resource Group, right? Always have a naming convention when you're creating your resources. You don't want them to scatter all over the place. Blex Tech VM. All right, so where is the location of this VM? So when you come across region, basically what this is telling us is that the data center where this virtual machine is going to be located. All right. So there are several data centers in Azure. There are over 100 data centers scattered across regions. So Microsoft has over 60 regions. And so these are some of the regions in Microsoft. So for convenience sake, we're going to put this in West US. Let's put this in West US. We have West US 2 here. Let me see if we can get just West US. All right, so put it in West US. Availability options. Yeah, so we're just going to stick with the current options we have right here. Leave that as default. So we want to create a Windows server, a Windows 10 computer, just like what you have on your laptop, right? So if you're using a Windows 10 laptop, I'm going to show you how that looks like in a cloud environment. So let's go ahead and search for Windows 10. All right, so here it is. This is a Windows 10 Pro server that we are going to be utilizing. and the VM architecture remains the same. All right, so remember how you have to buy a computer, maybe you go to Computer Village or you go to a computer center and you make an order. Maybe you said, okay, I want a computer tower. It's going to have a 300 RAM memory, 300 gigabytes of RAM memory, and it's going to have 1 terabyte size of storage. Or maybe you are interested in the compute, you're interested in the processor, right? Remember Core i7, Core i5 of those days. Yeah, so the same thing applies here. It's just that these configurations are going to be made virtually. So depending on the workloads you want to put in place, that is going to determine the kind of virtual machine you are going to build. So for instance, typically for testing purposes, you're going to go for the D series, D sizes. There are more sophisticated virtual machines for different use cases, workloads. So if you're in a gaming environment, right, you want to be considering the G series. So if you are in a big data environment, you might want to be looking for another type of VM that suits that demand. So right now, let's just go for something basic. Let's go for the D2S version 3. And the cool thing here is that you also be able to see possible cost and estimate of what you would be paying by the end of the month, depending on how often your VM is going to be running. So this is a D2S version 3. So let's select that VM. So that's the size we are going to be using. So your virtual machine must have a username. So I'm going to give this Blex user, Blex Tech user, and it's going to have a password as well. So let's go ahead and find a password for this Blex Tech user. Okay, I'm gonna bring this up. 1 second. Okay, so I found a password I can use for this Windows 10 machine. All right. So we want to be able to access this virtual machine over the network. So the VM will have a public IP address so that we'll be able to access it over the internet. And we also want to open up the access port for a Windows server. So typically a Windows server access port is going to be on the RDP port. A Linux server will have to be accessed through an SSH port. Port 22 goes to Linux server. Port 3389 goes to a Windows server. So yeah, let's confirm that we have the license. So right now, this is for demo purposes. So if you need additional storage, right? If you need a storage, you can make those selections here, and yeah, you can attach the disk just like you would do on your local machine. All right. Networking, we're going to keep things as they are. Yeah, it's going to be on the network. Yeah, it's associated to network. There's a subnet, which is a default subnet I'm using in my own case. If you are not comfortable with that virtual network, hopefully you already created a virtual network in West US. So if you already have a virtual network in West US or any region of choice, you can go ahead and make that selection. I don't need a load balancer for this VM right now, so I'm just going to keep things as they are. All right. How are users going to be able to access this VM? Do you want them to use their Azure Active Directory credentials, right? Or do you want them to use the username and password you have provided. And so for testing purposes, so that we don't incur unnecessary costs, I always recommend you utilize the auto shutdown so that once you are not around, right? Once you finish your task, even if you forget to shut down the computer, by checking this box, the VM will go offline by itself. All right, that's just a basic automation task there. All right, monitoring, yeah. If you want to be able to understand the performance, maybe you want to be able to identify some anomalous activities going on in your VM, yeah, you can enable monitoring features associated with it. If you have some deployment tasks you want it to accomplish at the time of initial startup, boot up, yeah, you can post those here. Maybe you want to install a Docker engine, right? Maybe you want to install a GitHub, a Git engine, right? On the machine, you can post the script here and it will capture the deployment for you. By the time you go into the VM, you'll be able to troubleshoot, you'll be able to query the VM and you will see that your Docker or Git engine has been successfully installed. So this is just how to create a virtual machine in Azure. So it's going to take a couple of minutes. It's a VM. Yeah, best practice, never, well, in your production environment, nobody will allow you to expose your RDP port. I'm only doing this because it's a demo, right? I won't do this in my production environment. So let's go ahead and create this. It's going to take a couple of seconds. We'll come back. I'll let you know once the VM has been created. So here we go. It didn't take us much time I thought it will. So let's go ahead and check the VM we created. Let's make sure everything we stipulated was accomplished. So we said we're going to create a Windows VM. It's here, check. So we selected the standard D series. It's going to give us an 8 gig memory, 2 core compute units. Of course, we want this VM to be publicly available. That is why we made sure it had a public IP address associated with it. So this virtual network is going to be this virtual machine is going to be in a virtual network. And because you're following a naming convention, so the names are going to be the same because this is going to belong to the Blex Technologies. All right. So there's no app running on the VM, so we're going to keep it as it is. Yeah, it also has a private IP address, right? So there's a public IP address, there's private IP address. If you want to know more about a public and private IP address, check my previous videos. You will find something somewhere where I've talked about a virtual networking in Azure environment. All right, everything looks good. So if we want to connect to this VM, what we need to do is to go ahead and click the connect button right here. It's also on the left side of the page, right? So on this left side there is a connect feature under settings as well. So once we get here, let's see if we'll be able to connect to the Windows server. Okay, RDP is opened. All right. Okay. So all right, so we're gonna download the RDP file, which will give us easy access to that virtual machine. So I'm gonna go ahead and download RDP file. So let's load that RDP client. Let's go ahead and connect to the VM. Connect. So I need to provide the username. So the username was BlexTech user, and we had a password associated with it as well. So let's just provide that username and password. Yeah. So if everything works fine, you should be able to get something similar to this, provided the username, the password. Voila, here it is. This is the VM still coming on. So just imagine you just bought your Windows 10 HP or Dell computer. This is what you experience, right? When you are starting it off for the first time. It's still the same thing. It's just that now this is not a physical server. This is a virtual server running on a Windows 10 operating system. All right. Does this look familiar? Your first time of starting up your newly acquired computer. Is this the same thing you saw? Yes, it's the same thing. I bet you on that. Right. So if everything looks fine, you should be seeing this. All right. So I'm going to give you an assignment. Go ahead, create a virtual machine in your Azure portal, and let me know what the experience was like. So in your own case, create a Linux server, right? Try to connect to the Linux server. So I created a Windows server, and I made sure it has a public IP address, remember? So if you want to check the components of this VM right now, let's do about PC. Yeah, about your PC. Let's see what we have in there. All right, so the device belongs to, okay, still loading up, piling pressure on the VM. Okay, so the device belongs to BlexTech. It's an 8 gig, so you won't get the whole RAM, right? The whole RAM storage, the 8 gigabytes of RAM storage. It's a Windows 10 Professional. Remember, that was what we selected when we're trying to create the virtual machine. Let's check storage. What do we have in storage? All right, so this is all we have in the storage. Okay, it has a C drive of 126 gigabytes. So this is a typical Windows 10 computer. The only thing is that it's not a local machine. It's not a physical server. It's a virtual server because it's going to be resident in a data center where Microsoft has provided. All right, so go ahead, create your own Windows 10 machine, Windows 11 machine. Let me know how if you had any challenge with it. Leave a comment in the chat. All right. Let me know if everything worked out fine. Let me know if you're also able to create a Linux machine, and leave us a comment in the chat. All right. Thank you.